Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. The movie begins with John Dolittle when he was a child, and he had a dog that he used to play with, running around everywhere. He loved his dog very much. One day, Dolittle discovered that he could communicate with his dog, talk to him, and understand his language. For them, it wasn't strange, and they were used to it, handling it naturally. This communication allowed John to learn some traits of dogs, their behaviors, and apply them in his life. In return, he taught the dog everything about humans. One day, John Dolittle was out with his father when they met his father's boss. His father introduced him to the boss and asked John to shake his hand, but John acted strangely. Instead of shaking the boss's hand, he turned around and started sniffing him like a dog. This made John's father worried about his son's behavior. He started thinking that his son was possessed by a spirit or demon. So, he decided to bring a priest from the church to exorcise the demon from his son. Indeed, the priest came and began performing the exorcism with violence toward John to get the demon out of him. At that moment, John was very scared and terrified of the priest's actions. He ran out of the house quickly before the dog attacked the priest again. John was laughing at the priest because of what the dog did and was behaving strangely and wildly. After that, John's father decided to sell the dog, thinking that his son might act normally if he wasn't so attached to the dog. A car came and took the dog away, and John was heartbroken as he was very attached to the dog, seeing him as everything in his life. Since then, John started behaving normally, as he no longer communicated with dogs after his father sold the dog. Over time, he lived a normal life and lost his ability to communicate with dogs because he hadn't spoken to his dog for a long time. As time passes, the years go by, and John grows up, becoming a doctor. He gets married and has children, becoming famous in the whole city. He even built a large hospital that was his own. However, as John grew older, he started dealing with animals with extreme cruelty and harshness due to what had happened to him as a child with his dog. He couldn't stand to see any animal in front of him, especially dogs. One day, John receives an offer to sell his hospital. A company wants to buy it for an enormous amount of money, a sum beyond imagination. John is torn about the offer because it's a once-in-a-lifetime deal. He starts discussing it with his colleagues at the hospital. When he gets home, he talks to his wife about the offer as well, feeling confused and unsure about what to do. One day, John takes a day off from work to drive his wife and kids to visit their relatives in the countryside. His youngest daughter was deeply in love with animals and loved raising them. At the time, she had a pet that had gone missing. To avoid being late for the visit, she left the animal at home and asked her father to look for her missing pet and bring it to her at her grandmother's house because she couldn't spend a day without it. That night, before going to bed, John set up a large number of mouse traps around his bed to ensure the mouse wouldn't disturb him in his sleep. However, the mouse managed to avoid all the traps John had set and climbed onto his bed, slipping under his blanket. It crawled over John's body, startling him in his sleep. He woke up suddenly, panicking and screaming at the mouse. He quickly caught it and put it in its cage, feeling relieved that the mouse wouldn't wake him up again. However, at that moment, John's luck took a turn. He received a call from the hospital informing him of a critically ill patient who needed urgent attention. John, feeling frustrated that his sleep was being interrupted, had no choice but to head to the hospital immediately to save the patient. When John arrives at the hospital, it turns out the case wasn't as critical as reported, which frustrates him. He argues with everyone at the hospital for the unnecessary call, then leaves, heading back home to continue the sleep he's been missing since the morning. On his way back, John accidentally hits a dog with his car. The dog gets up and looks at John in the car, asking for help. John, thinking he must be dreaming, begins to recall the days when he could communicate with his dog. However, he dismisses it and goes home to sleep, as he has an important meeting the next day with the company interested in buying his hospital. John has already decided to sell it. The next morning, John gets dressed up and heads to the meeting with the company to finalize the deal. During the meeting, John becomes anxious when he hears strange noises around him. At first, he thinks it's the people in the room, but then he notices two mice on the floor fighting. He can hear them speaking and starts to panic as memories of his childhood and his dog flood back. He excuses himself from the meeting and quickly leaves, rushing to his car. Just before John drives off, he hears a loud sound. It's a horse speaking to him. John is shocked by the strange and unexplainable events happening around him. Confused and unable to understand what's going on, he drives off in a hurry, heading home. On his way, John remembers his daughter's missing pet mouse. He feels guilty for leaving it behind and thinking of how upset his daughter would be. He decides to turn back. He picks up the mouse from the ground and says that he'll take it with him for his daughter's sake, but if it opens its mouth again, he'll throw it out of the car. Even though he's annoyed, John ties the mouse securely on top of the car, refusing to let it inside, and drives to his father's house in the countryside. When he arrives, his daughter takes her pet mouse and John's father suggests he stay with them for the rest of his vacation instead of spending it alone at home. John agrees to stay with his family and his father. Later that night, after John had changed into his pajamas and eaten well, feeling relaxed, he hears the sound of an owl outside calling him. Surprised, John rushes out to investigate, and the owl says, "I know you can hear and understand me. There's a thorn stuck in my wing, and I need you to remove it and treat it." John is shocked and overwhelmed by what's happening to him. He runs back into the house, grabs a glass of water, and drinks it quickly, trying to comprehend what just happened. But things get even stranger. He suddenly sees many animals inside the house, all talking to him. Even his daughter's pet mouse calls out to him. At this point, John starts to feel like he's losing his mind and decides to leave the countryside and return to the city. He can't handle all these bizarre occurrences. On the way back, John calls his friend, a doctor, and asks to meet him immediately before he completely loses his sanity. While driving, a car pulls up next to him with the same dog he hit earlier, and the dog starts talking to him again. John, now totally overwhelmed, heads to meet his doctor friend. When John arrives, he begs the doctor to run some tests, do scans, and examine his brain because he believes he must be sick and imagining everything. After running the tests, his doctor reassures him that he's perfectly fine, all his results are normal, and that the strange experiences are likely due to stress from work. He suggests John take a couple of days off to rest and recover. John leaves the doctor's office, still confused, and drives away. Along the way, he spots a car with the same dog he had hit, and the dog starts yelling at him for the accident earlier. John follows the dog's car and eventually arrives at a dog shelter, where the dog had been taken for care. John goes inside the shelter and decides to adopt the dog. He brings the dog into his car, and the dog starts talking again, telling John that he's not feeling well and needs to see a vet. John reluctantly agrees to take him to a veterinarian for treatment. At first, John is frustrated with the dog and considers getting rid of him, but during a phone call with his daughter, she overhears the dog barking and assumes that her father has bought her a new pet. Overjoyed, she asks him to bring the dog to her immediately. John heads to his father's house and introduces the dog to his daughter, who is thrilled to meet her new pet. She instantly bonds with the dog and begs her father to take them back home so she can keep the dog. Despite feeling conflicted, John agrees, and they pack up their bags and equipment, ready to return home with his wife, daughter, and their new pet dog. After that, they return home, and John is shocked to find many animals inside his house, all asking him for help because they're sick and need the same veterinarian who treated the dog. At that moment, John asks them, "What's all this noise? I can't sleep." He tells them that there's nothing wrong and asks them to be quiet, so his daughter doesn't see all the animals in the house and gets scared. Then, the owl comes by John's house and informs him that she was the one who told the animals that there's a human who can help and treat them, leading them to his place. One of the animals, a tiger, speaks up and says, "I have a headache. I can't see properly anymore. At the circus, no one cares about me anymore, and they decided to kick me out and lock me in a cage." John reassures the tiger, "Don't worry, I'm a doctor and I've worked hard to get to where I am. Just give me a chance and I'll help you." John then calls the veterinarian who treated the dog earlier and asks about the tiger's condition after explaining all the details about the tiger's injuries. He decides to take the tiger to the vet for treatment. Later, John goes to his hospital, and as he enters, he sees a mouse that is very sick and learns that it's about to die. John brings the mouse inside his hospital and starts examining it to provide the appropriate treatment. They enter a room where John hangs the mouse up and sees it talking just like a human being, as if it's completely normal. This shocks John's friends, the doctors, and his wife, who become concerned and think he has lost his mind. They decide to take him to a psychiatrist to ensure he's mentally stable. At the psychiatrist's office, John discovers that the person responsible for his evaluation was an old classmate from school. The problem is that this classmate had a cat that he kept in the office, but he never liked John because John was the smartest kid in class, always coming in first on exams. This made it difficult for the classmate to rank among the top students. When this classmate tells his family that John's mind is unwell and that he needs to be committed, John spends every day there. One day, his wife comes to visit him to check on his condition. John tells her, "I can really talk to the animals. I can communicate with them without any difficulty." His wife thinks he's lying and that he's actually lost his mind, so she leaves him there alone. The next day, John's friend, who doesn't like him, brings in a monkey to measure his vital signs. At that moment, the official asks John to communicate with the monkey and get it to change its vital signs. If he can do that, he won't be considered crazy and will be released from here, allowing him to tell the world that there is someone who can communicate with animals, whether large or small. John tries to connect with the monkey, but it doesn't respond to him or show any reaction. When the doctor asks to take it back to John's room, the monkey finally responds and starts speaking in Spanish, but it can't speak English. It feels as if the writer had prepared for this twist before turning the film around. Because the monkey speaks Spanish, John struggles to communicate with it. He tells the official that the monkey must have come from across the border and is hiding because it only speaks Spanish, making it difficult for him to communicate. The doctor thinks that John is completely losing his mind, and the nurses intervene to take him back to his room. In the morning, John is in the hospital garden when he receives a visit from the doctor he works with. The doctor informs him that the company wanting to buy the hospital is asking about him and emphasizes that he needs to leave the mental hospital as soon as possible to finalize the sale agreement, as this opportunity won't come again. Meanwhile, we shift to the tiger that John saved while he was at the circus. The tiger is upset and pacing around, feeling worse each day. It thinks to itself that John has tricked it and won't help, leaving it to suffer until it dies. At this moment, the dog appears and hears the tiger talking to itself. The dog then goes to the hospital where John is confined and communicates with him, explaining that the tiger's condition is deteriorating and that he must save it soon, or it will die. John, feeling overwhelmed, yells at the dog, ordering it to leave instead of insisting he go save the tiger. This moment is incredibly intense for John, as he feels torn between reality and what seems like madness, pulling at his hair in frustration. In the morning of the next day, the hospital administrator demands that John leave immediately due to an urgent situation outside, but the doctor refuses, provoking him and stating that John won't be released for at least a month. At this moment, John's cat, who belongs to the administrator, finds a way to help John by threatening the administrator about his hidden ballet dresses, which could lead to a scandal. Terrified of the potential embarrassment, the administrator reluctantly agrees to sign John's release papers for that day. After John leaves the hospital, he returns home to reassure his wife and daughter. He checks in with them and then heads to his own hospital, where the animals try to communicate with him. However, he chooses to ignore them, wanting to live a normal life and not be perceived as insane. The next day, before heading to work, John overhears his daughter talking to her grandfather, expressing her feelings of neglect and that her father doesn't love her. The grandfather comforts her, explaining that her father loves her dearly. Following this, John takes his family to the hospital to finalize the sale paperwork. They arrive at a party, and John, along with the dog, rushes to save the tiger after learning that the tiger is in critical condition. After freeing the tiger from its cage, John places it in his vehicle, but the police manage to get the license plate number. Upon arriving at the hospital, John begins examining the tiger, but his colleagues see the tiger and panic. John tries to calm them down to prevent the tiger from attacking. However, the administrators urge him to sign the contracts immediately because the company owner is losing patience, and if John doesn't comply, the deal will be canceled. John decides to treat the tiger first, placing it under the bed of a colleague while trying to get it treated without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, the police chief pressures John to sign the contracts, and as the tiger spots a rat on the table, it escapes, causing chaos among the staff. In a moment of crisis, John manages to soothe the tiger again and explains to everyone that the tiger will die if it doesn't receive immediate surgery. They quickly take the tiger to the operating room, while the police attempt to enter the hospital to arrest John. At this point, a number of animals come to John's aid, preventing the police from reaching him. John's father informs his wife that their son has had this ability to communicate with animals since he was a child. Inspired by her husband's unique talent, she decides to support him during the surgery. John successfully operates on the tiger, alleviating its pain, and the tiger begins to heal, no longer feeling any discomfort. After that, John decides not to sell the hospital and also chooses to treat both humans and animals there. He transforms into a well-known figure in the entire city, becoming famous as the doctor who can talk to and communicate with animals. The movie ends. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button to get more new videos. See ya!